The sun beat down, relentless, on the high plains, baking the earth until it cracked. Cale watched the flies, a black, buzzing shroud, claim his father. 3 sunrises had come and gone since the bluecoats rode away, leaving only dust and silence and the terrible, growing stillness in the place where his father had fallen. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and something else, something heavy and sweet and wrong that made Cale's stomach clench. He sat hunched, a small solitary figure against the vast, indifferent sky, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the shape that had once been strength, laughter, and guiding hands. His throat was dry, parched raw by fear and the endless, mournful wind that whispered secrets only the dead knew. Hunger gnawed, a dull ache in his belly, but it was a distant sensation, overshadowed by the icy grip of terror that kept him frozen, rooted to the spot near the decaying flesh. Every shadow seemed to lengthen into a threat, every distant sound the cry of a hawk, the rustle of dry grass, sharpened his senses to an unbearable point. He was just a boy, maybe 10 summers, stripped of everything that had given his world shape and safety. His people were gone, scattered like ash or worse. Only his father remained, or what was left of him, a grim anchor in a sea of terrifying emptiness. He didn't know how long he stayed there. Time blurred, measured only by the sun's arc and the increasing swarm of flies. His legs grew stiff, his back ached, but he couldn't move. To move felt like abandoning the last vestige of his world, acknowledging the finality of the silence. He knew he should find water, shelter, should try to follow the faint, broken trail his people might have taken. But the will was crushed out of him, replaced by a paralyzing despair. He thought of his mother, her gentle hands, her stories, gone. His cousins, the games they played, gone. Only this stillness, this silence, this smell. He hugged his knees, burying his face against them, trying to block out the sight, the smell, the reality. But the sun still burned, the flies still buzzed, and the heavy presence of death remained. It was then, through the haze of his grief and fear, that he first saw the horseman, a lone figure on the horizon, silhouetted against the blinding glare. He felt a fresh wave of terror. Was it more bluecoats? More pale-faced men who brought fire and death? He froze harder, trying to melt into the dry earth. The figure approached slowly, deliberately, a dark shape against the light. He rode a bay horse, its coat dusty, its head low. The rider was large, draped in worn canvas and leather, a wide-brimmed hat obscuring his face. He didn't ride towards the body. He rode towards Cale. The man stopped his horse a distance away, far enough that Cale could feel the space, the hesitation. He dismounted slowly, movements ungjajogin, deliberate. Cale watched him, eyes wide with a primal fear. He was tall, rangy, his face obscured by the hat's shadow and a thick, dust-colored beard. He carried a rifle, resting casually in the crook of his arm, but he made no move to raise it. He just stood there, still as a rock formation, observing. Cale didn't move, didn't make a sound. He was a hunted animal, frozen in the face of a predator. The man took a step forward, then another, his boots crunching softly on the dry ground. Cale flinched, scrambling back a little, his small body pressed against the sparse, thorny brush. The man stopped again. He didn't speak. He simply lowered himself to the ground, cross-legged, several yards away from Cale, his rifle now resting beside him. He pulled a canteen from his belt and took a long drink, his throat working. Cale watched him, suspicion warring with a desperate, buried need for something other than the terrible solitude. The man didn't look directly at him, his gaze sweeping the horizon, the land, everything but Cale. It was a strange kind of ignoring, one that didn't feel dismissive, but somehow respectful of the space Cale needed. After a time that stretched and warped in the heat, the man reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a strip of jerky. He held it out, not towards Cale, but simply extended his arm, palm up, offering it to the empty space between them. Cale's eyes fixed on the meat, his stomach twisted violently with hunger. But the fear was still a cold stone in his gut. He didn't move, The man didn't urge him. He simply held the jerky there, his arm steady. The silence returned, heavy and absolute, broken only by the buzzing flies near the body and the wind. After a long while, the man lowered his arm slowly. He didn't eat the jerky. He placed it carefully on a flat rock near where he sat. Then, with the same quiet deliberation, he stood up, mounted his horse, and rode away, back the way he came, disappearing over the rise as silently as he had appeared. Cale remained frozen, watching the spot where he had been. The jerky lay on the rock, a small, tangible thing in the vast, indifferent landscape. It wasn't a trap, not that he could see, just left there. He waited until the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, purple shadows. Only then, when the fear of remaining in the open through the night began to outweigh the fear of moving, did he crawl slowly towards the rock. His hand trembled as he reached for the jerky. It was tough, dry, but it was food. He ate it slowly, watching the horizon, half expecting the man to reappear. He didn't. The next morning, the man was back. He appeared as silently as before, a shape solidifying out of the heat haze. He didn't approach the body, didn't approach Cale directly. This time, he dismounted further away, near a small stand of cottonwood trees that indicated a dry wash, perhaps holding moisture deep beneath the sand. He knelt, not looking at Cale, and began to scrape at the earth with a small shovel he carried. Cale watched him, hidden behind a rock, his initial terror dulled slightly by the gnawing hunger and the memory of the jerky. The man worked patiently, his movements economical. After some time, he dug a shallow hole, maybe 2 feet down, and then placed several larger rocks around it, creating a small barrier. He didn't seem to find water. He covered the hole again, smoothing the earth back. Then, he walked over to the stand of trees and broke off a few dry branches. He gathered some tinder, his back still mostly to Cale, and with swift, practiced movements, started a small fire. Cale had not seen a fire since. He flinched from the memory. But this fire was small, controlled, a different kind of warmth than the destructive flames he remembered. When the fire was going, the man took a small pot from his saddlebag, filled it with water from his canteen, and hung it over the flames on a tripod of sticks. He added something from a small pouch. Maybe coffee, Cale didn't know. The smell, when it wafted towards Cale, was strange but not unpleasant. He watched the man pour the dark liquid into a metal cup and sip it slowly, his eyes still scanning the vast plains. He seemed utterly alone, yet completely self-sufficient, a part of the harsh landscape itself. Cale's gaze drifted back to the body of his father. The flies were still there, a constant, sickening hum. The man finished his drink, doused the fire carefully with sand until only smoking embers remained, and then began to prepare a meal. More jerky, yes, but he also pulled out hardtack and something else, wrapped in cloth. He ate slowly, chewing deliberately. When he was done, he repeated the gesture from the previous day. He placed a portion of the food jerky and hardtack this time on a rock near Cale's hiding spot. He didn't look at Cale. He simply left it there. Then, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Cale once again alone with the terrible silence and the food offering. Hunger won again. As dusk fell, Cale crept out and retrieved the food. He ate it quickly, his eyes darting nervously towards the horizon. The man's presence was a disruption, a puzzle, but also, undeniably, a source of survival. He hadn't spoken a single word. His silence was as profound as the silence of the dead. Yet, in that silence, there was no demand, no threat, only sustenance offered and space respected. It was a language Cale did not understand, but which his starving body was learning to trust, just a little. On the 4th day, the man didn't just leave food. He came closer. He didn't try to touch Cale, didn't speak, but he knelt a little closer, his back to the boy, and began to dig a grave. Cale watched him, numb. Digging in this hard, dry earth was difficult work, the shovel scraping against rock and compacted dirt. The man worked steadily, his movements tireless and focused. He dug a deep, narrow trench. Cale understood. He was doing what Cale could not bring himself to do. He was honoring the dead, or at least putting the body to rest. It was a profound, unspoken act, one that chipped away at the wall of ice around Cale's heart. As the man worked, a small caravan appeared on the horizon, a wagon, a few riders. They were coming from the direction Cale's people might have gone. Cale tensed, ready to flee, but the man simply paused his digging, stood up, and walked towards his horse. He didn't hide. He stood in the open, waiting. Cale watched from his rock as the caravan approached. They were settlers, their faces grim and wary. One of the riders pointed towards the man, then towards Cale's father's body. Shouting drifted on the wind, though Cale couldn't make out the words. The settlers were agitated. The man stood his ground, his rifle now held loosely, ready, but not aimed. He didn't speak, just met their stares. There was a tense standoff. Cale saw one of the settlers raise his rifle, pointing towards the man, then towards Cale. The man shifted slightly, his body becoming a shield between the settlers and Cale. His silence was not weakness. It was a challenge, a barrier. The settler yelled again, louder this time. The man didn't reply, just slowly raised his own rifle, not pointing it at them, but holding it level, a clear signal. He was protecting the space. After what felt like an eternity, the lead settler lowered his rifle, muttered something to the others, and they slowly, reluctantly rode around the area, giving the man and the body a wide berth, their eyes still fixed on the silent figure who defended a dead Comanche and a terrified boy. Cale watched them go, his heart pounding. The man hadn't flinched, hadn't backed down. He had simply stood there, a silent, formidable presence. When the settlers were out of sight, the man lowered his rifle and returned to his digging. He finished the grave, deep enough. Then, with great care and strength, he lifted Cale's father's body, wrapped loosely in a blanket Cale hadn't seen him produce, and lowered it into the earth. He filled the grave slowly, carefully, his movements somber and respectful. He didn't mark the grave. When he was done, he stood for a moment, head bowed, hat in hand, facing east. It was a gesture Cale understood, a moment of respect for the departed. It was then that Cale made a sound, a small, choked sob that he couldn't hold back. The man didn't turn immediately. He stood there for another moment, then slowly put his hat back on. He finally turned towards Cale. For the first time, Cale saw his face clearly. It was weathered, lined, the eyes a pale blue beneath heavy brows, holding a depth of sorrow Cale recognized. He didn't smile, didn't soften his expression, but there was no hardness either, only a quiet acknowledgement. He nodded, a single, slow dip of his head. It wasn't a question or a command. It was acceptance. He didn't offer food this time. He simply walked back to his horse, mounted, and waited. He didn't look back at the grave, didn't look directly at Cale. He just sat there, facing west, towards the setting sun, towards where the land stretched wild and empty. He waited. Cale hesitated, looking one last time at the place where his father lay buried, a small mound of disturbed earth in the vastness. The flies were gone from that spot. He looked at the silent man on the horse, a dark silhouette against the fiery sky. He didn't understand this man, this silent protector who buried his dead and faced down threats without a word. But he had shown kindness, capability, and a strange, unasked-for loyalty. He had seen Cale in his lowest moment, vulnerable and alone, and had not exploited it, but instead offered sustenance and safety. The ice around Cale's heart began to melt further, replaced by a tentative, fragile thread of something new, not trust yet, but something akin to weary hope. The plains were dangerous. He was alone. The man was not. He was a mystery, yes, but he was also shelter in a storm. Slowly, stiffly, Cale pushed himself up from the ground. His legs ached. His head felt light, but the paralysis was gone. He looked back at the grave, a silent farewell. Then, he turned his face towards the waiting figure on the horse. He took one step, then another. The man remained still, a silent invitation. Cale walked towards him, leaving the place of death and despair behind. As he approached, the man finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly, like stones tumbling over dry earth. The first words Cale had ever heard him utter. Name. Cale stopped a few feet away, looking up at the man. The sound of his own language felt strange after days of silence. Cale, he whispered, his voice hoarse and unused. The man nodded slowly, his gaze holding Cale's. He didn't offer his own name, didn't offer a hand, just held Cale's gaze. Come on then, Cale, he said softly, turning his horse westward. Sun's going down, it wasn't a question, but a simple statement of fact, a path laid out. Cale nodded, the single nod acknowledging the unspoken agreement. He didn't have a horse, didn't have supplies, only the clothes on his back and the gnawing emptiness inside. But he had survived the impossible, watched his world burn, and found an unexpected, silent anchor in the desolation. He walked towards the man's horse, his small figure following the larger one as they moved together into the fading light, two solitary shapes against the immense, indifferent sky. It was not a rescue, not a family found, but a beginning, forged in silence, sorrow, and the harsh, unyielding crucible of the frontier. The land demanded strength, and sometimes, that strength came in the most unexpected, quiet forms, offering a hand not with words, but with action, a silent promise of shared burdens under the vast, watchful sky. He didn't know where they were going, or what lay ahead, but for the first time in days, the crushing weight of absolute solitude had lifted, replaced by the quiet rhythm of the horse's hooves and the steady, silent presence of the man who waited. He knew, with the certainty of a child who had seen too much of the world's harsh truth, that this path would be long, difficult, and marked by more loss and hardship. The world out here did not offer easy comfort. But as he walked alongside the horse, the man a silent guide just ahead, Cale felt a flicker of something that was not fear, not grief, but a hard, small seed of determination taking root in the barren ground of his soul. He was Cale, and he was walking, not running, walking forward. That, in itself, was a triumph. The silence of the plains stretched around them, but it no longer felt entirely empty. There was the soft creak of leather, the breath of the horse, the quiet presence of another human being who, for reasons Cale did not yet understand and might never fully know, had chosen not to leave him to the flies and the silence and the vast, terrible emptiness. He had been found, not by a searching party or a kind family, but by a man of few words and deliberate actions, a man who saw the boy among the dead and simply waited. It was enough. For now it was everything. The journey stretched out before them, a line drawn in the dust, leading into the setting sun, guided by the silent cowboy and the boy who had watched his world end and was now, slowly, painfully, beginning to live again. Resilience was not loud. It was the quiet, steady beat of a heart that refused to surrender. And Cale's heart was beating.